Straight ahead on College Football Live out of the tunnel on this Tuesday. Complete coverage of the Hokies' new hire, how Virginia Tech and James Franklin can rehab each other's image. The Texas Longhorns, were they overrated, properly rated, or as Steve Sarkisian said, something completely different? Wait till you see what the coach said about his 3-loss team. And 6.5 hours away from the latest playoff rankings, our playoff insider on the biggest committee question she's got for tonight. And with that, we welcome you inside College Football Live. Pete, Tom, Sam, Zubin here with you. The coaching dominoes are starting to fall. A few weeks back, Matt Rhule opts to stay at Nebraska. And now we've got our first big move with James Franklin going to Virginia Tech, his new gig. Let's discuss it. So here's the deal, right? 6 days after getting fired, he shows up with Pete and the gang on College game day and says, look, I'm ready to go and win a championship somewhere else. 5 weeks later, the destination is Blacksburg, Virginia. He is nothing if not a program builder, and Virginia Tech clearly needs to be built. They did put forward a $229 million capital investment, admitting as such that their commitment did not match their energy. And with that, let's start here with Pete. You kind of broke this story late last week. The rumblings are there. It's now official. Take us through the industry buzz on what you're hearing now that this is official and James Franklin is off the market.
Zubin, industry-wide, this has really been received as a Grand Slam hire, and you used the proper phrase in the intro. James Franklin is an elite program builder. He elevated Vanderbilt out of a century of bad football and turned them into a winner. He then went to Penn State, which was amid perhaps the worst scandal we've seen in modern college sports in dealing with the fallout and the sanctions from that, and he rebuilt them to where they won a league title 3 seasons after his arrival. James Franklin has built consistently, he's won consistently, he's an elite recruiter, and he's also a developer. Penn State players year after year at the Combine were amongst the highest performers. James Franklin knows the bones and the guts of how to get a program going, and obviously has the recruiting chops in the DMV, the 757, those are areas he's very familiar with, to get things going and get them going quickly at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, Pete, 2 stops at Maryland, as you referenced, the recruiting knowledge of the DMV and the state of Virginia. You know, obviously building a program has a direct correlation to recruiting. Well, in today's college football climate, in order to be at your best in that area, you're going to have the resources put forth through the university with top-down alignment to allow the front porch of Virginia Tech to be led by its football program. And I don't think James Franklin goes anywhere near a job where he doesn't have total autonomy and doesn't have the resources to go out and do this thing right, because you've got everything else you need there at Virginia Tech to wave a magic wand and have James Franklin get this program turned around rapidly because of the resources coupled with the recruiting knowledge.
Well, it's not just the resources and the recruiting knowledge. It's also the fact that Virginia Tech is a national brand. They have not had the success that you would have thought a team like Virginia Tech would have had over the last decade or so. But you think about going back to about 20 or 15 or so years ago, even before then, this is a brand where high school kids will hear about Virginia Tech and hear about Enter Sandman and hear about some of the players like Michael Vick, etc. And there's this desire to want to rebuild a program like that. So they're not starting from scratch, nor are they starting from ground zero. There is an idea of a guy who can build a program. He's done it before, a national recruiting, the recruiting hotbed, but also a place where players would want to go. All those athletes in the DMV, in that Baltimore area, right in the Virginia area, Virginia Tech's a place that they want to help rebuild. So perfect home run hire, but more so because of the school and the brand that is built.
Let me just accentuate one thing before we move on to both Pete and Tom said, which is I took a look at the Penn State recruiting rankings in the class of 2023. If you take a look at the top 10 players from the state or Commonwealth of Virginia in 2023, 6 of those 10 went to Penn State. And now the mission is to keep those guys home and play for Franklin at his new locale. The only name bigger in the coaching search, of course, than James Franklin right now is Lane Kiffin. You've probably seen some stories over the last 24 hours about how his family has visited a couple of SEC locales with head coaching openings. You probably also saw a story that his current employer, Ole Miss, put a deadline on him to make a decision, which is about 10 days from now when they play their rivalry game, the Egg Bowl, against Mississippi State. About an hour ago, Kiffin went on the Pat McAfee show and basically debunked the entire latter narrative.
Yeah, that's absolutely not true. There's been no ultimatum, anything like that at all. And so I don't know where that came from, like a lot of stuff that comes out there. Like I said, man, we're having a blast. I love it here. I mean, our running back's sitting right over here. Come on over. And it just couldn't be better. Like I say, you pray for things. Our fans prayed for this type of thing, and now we're in the middle of it. So enjoy it. You're 10-1. You're getting ready. You got a bye week. You get to watch half the country lose, and there's no way we can lose Saturday. And then you play the Egg Bowl and go dominate that and keep that Egg Bowl trophy home where it's been for a long time.
It's incredible. Let me give you guys a quick salute before we ask. Like, Pete, let me start with you. I hate using this word because it's so overwrought, but this does seem like a fluid situation. Kind of take us through what might we be thinking about and looking for as this thing develops.
Well, with Ole Miss on a bye, it's clear that Ole Miss officials want some clarity from Lane Kiffin on his future. He has on his desk, metaphorically, a contract that will make him amongst the highest paid coaches in college football. And credit Ole Miss, throughout Lane Kiffin's tenure there, they have been ahead of the curve on paying him and keeping him, and ahead of the curve on NIL, which is how they've had these great rosters in back-to-back years. There is one clean option for Lane Kiffin and his future, and that would be signing a deal and staying at Ole Miss. Any other options are going to be thorny. It's becoming apparent that the notion of him taking another job and coaching in the playoff would be a tremendous high wire act to walk all the way out until December 19th. So if we don't get this clean option here in the near future, whether there's a deadline this weekend or next week or whatever it is, once we get past the Egg Bowl and those other options become looming, it will be a thorny high wire act for Lane Kiffin.
Oh, there's no question about that, because if you look at this from Ole Miss's perspective, they have a responsibility and a duty to be able to have some answers in place quickly. As you referenced, you got National Signing Day coming up, then you come back after championship weekend. The entire month of December is a dead period, and then you come off of the college football playoff, and now you have your one-time transfer portal period. So Ole Miss wants to be sure that they aren't behind the eight ball and can hit the ground running. And the sooner they know what's going to happen with their current coach, Lane Kiffin, then they can start making some moves. And, of course, behind the scenes, you know they're already coming up with contingency plans. But the calendar right now, as it relates to college football, is not ideal the longer this goes on. As Pete put it, you want to be able to have a clean knowledge of what's going on. It gets muddier the longer it goes.
But the truth is that there is a reason why we haven't seen a report why Lane Kiffin has signed a contract extension. Maybe it's because of money, but I doubt that. Maybe he is still looking at some of these other places, and maybe it's a school like LSU. Who knows what it is? But there's been a lot of coaches that have had this conversation of, hey, man, there's an opening here and an opening there, and all of a sudden they get and they sign that extension, whether it be a guy like Rhett Lashley or Matt Rule. Some of these names that have popped up, they have signed. Lane Kiffin still hasn't, and until he does, his name not only will continue to be floating around out there, but there'll be people continue to think that, oh yeah, he's ready to leave to a better opportunity.
Yeah, last thing I would say, Ole Miss Athletic Director Keith Carter is under a lot of pressure here. Did say back in October, essentially, we are ready to give him a Cignetti type of deal if he wants it. Carter played basketball at Ole Miss. He is a very passionate Ole Miss supporter, put the uniform on, and now he's got the biggest test of his life, only won't be in the court. It's going to be trying to hammer out a deal with the toughest opponent in all of college sports. Pete, you know this man's name. I believe his name is Jimmy Sexton. On College Football Live, again, it appears Texas is not back. Throttled Saturday between the hedges, an absolute meat grinder in the fourth quarter as Georgia just wore down the horn, scoring 21 unanswered en route to an easy victory. It's their third loss of the season. Let's take a look at the tail of the tape through 10 games last season. They're sitting there at 9-1, cruising towards the playoff. This year, cruising towards the playoff, anything but, sitting there with 7 wins and 3 losses, and their offense and offensive numbers way down. Steve Sarkisian was asked earlier this week if this season, frankly, has been a letdown.
Steve, what would you say the main reasons are this team is underachieved?
According to who?
Well, when you're preseason number 1, I think most people would agree 3 losses is not achieving what you are capable of.
I mean, I guess that's into who voted us number one, okay? What I think is that this team has competed their tail off. They've been faced with a lot of different adversity and injuries, and a lot of stuff has come across this team's plate. And I'm very, very proud of them with their resiliency. At the end of the day, at the University of Texas, we're held to a very high standard. And the standard is to compete for championships year in and year out. And we're going to play the best teams in the country. We're going to schedule the best teams in the country. But by the end of the season, we'll play, of our 12 regular season opponents, 5 of those teams will be top 10 teams when we play them, so nearly half our schedule. And we have an opportunity at the end of the regular season to do something that nobody's done since 2019, and that's beat 3 top 10 ranked teams in the regular season. The last team to do that was LSU with Joe Burrow. So have we been faced with a pretty difficult schedule? Have we been faced with high expectations? Sure, but that's why we came here. So we'll be okay.
Interesting. All right, Sam, let's start with you. You put on the burnt orange. You walked on the 40 acres. Are you buying what he just said?
I actually am buying what he said, but the reason why I'm buying it is because what hasn't happened yet. Right now, Texas hasn't performed up to their standard. It's clear. But the question, and one thing that Sarkisian did say in the interview, was that the last 2 games matter. They play a 2-game season. We've been talking all week about, man, what happens if Texas loses to Georgia? Are they out of the playoff completely? And the answer technically is no, because if they beat Arkansas, then go and beat A&M at the end of the season, they still would have an opportunity. And so all of what we've seen this season, the good and the bad, can be erased by how you finish. But that game versus Georgia was an underperformance. I would argue the game versus Ohio State wasn't the best performance. Even there were some wins that weren't as impressive as you would have expected. So, no, Texas has not performed up to what the expectation was, but it's not finished yet. And this season and this team will be defined by how they finish these last 2 games.
Well, and Sam, you're right. And these last 2 games include, another top 10 opponent, which would give them 3 wins versus top 10 opponents if they were to pull that off. Listen, I think when you look at the expectations, we know what the standard is. And this program's come a long way under Steve Sarkisian. It's easy to forget where it was when he took it over. But when you come into the season and you have a preseason AP poll, right, the expectation is that Arch Manning is going to play like a redshirt senior. The expectation is that you are not going to be hit with deficiencies or youth in the offensive line that you're going to play out of sight. All right. The expectation is that you're not going to have injuries at the running back position. Well, guess what? None of those things happened. All right. So there's some growth, there's some immaturity, and some things haven't gone their way. I think they still got a great core nucleus. I think their best football's in front of them. The quarterback's only going to get better. Has it been disappointing? Absolutely. Is Sark disappointed? Is he frustrated? Absolutely he is. But I agree 100% with what he said. I agree with you on it, Sam. Let's see how this thing plays out over the last 2 weeks. If we've learned one thing about college football, it's been chaotic just about each and every weekend with somebody. Who's that somebody going to be the next couple of weeks?
I will say this, though, Lugs. You talked about the expectation. The expectation also wasn't that Texas would lose 35-10 to Georgia. Like, that wasn't the expectation, nor that Texas would lose 21-29 to Florida. Those weren't the expectations for this team's season, regardless who was at running back, who was at quarterback, who was injured, who was not. And so I understand injuries. That's part of football. Every team has injuries. I understand, okay, you might not have the strengths that you thought at different positions. I would argue that a coach needs to either develop better or recruit better. And so I understand that the expectation should not have been, but you could argue that it's not fair to have the #1 ranking. But that is the mantle that you hold when you are a team like the University of Texas that has gone to back-to-back college football playoffs. So the expectation may not have been as high, but it definitely was, at least not for me and a lot of people who support Texas or watch Texas, isn't as low as losing 35-10 to Georgia and also having 3 losses at this point in the season and playing the way that the team has played.
Yeah, so the 3 losses is where I want to go with our playoff insider, Heather Dinich, who now joins us. Heather, I'm just looking at the playoff rankings here. Take a look at this. I'm just looking at it. The highest ranked last week, so Texas is sitting there at 10 in last week's rankings. As I scan down, the highest ranked 3-loss team, according to the committee, and this is apples to oranges, is Iowa at 21. That's the highest ranked 3-loss team. With Texas sitting there with 3 losses tonight, having had a chance to look over everything over the weekend the way you do, where do we expect the committee to maybe slot them tonight?
Zubin, I dropped them to 15th in my projection behind Miami because remember, Miami beat Florida Texas did not. Miami also has fewer losses. I think where they are depends on Sam. We heard him talk about the opportunities that are still ahead. And yes, if they beat Texas A&M in the regular season finale, they'll have one of the best wins in the country. But where they are tonight indicates they need to do that. And how much help do they also need? Because remember, if they are around 15, they've got to get to 10 to be safe and not get knocked out during the seeding process.
And Heather, I just got a quick question if we got a second is, okay, you slotted them at 15, but how will the committee view a 25-point loss to Georgia? Will they see them as 15 or maybe even lower beyond teams like Georgia Tech and other teams that could be in front of them?
Well, how they lost definitely matters, but I still think that the committee will use Vanderbilt and that head-to-head as sort of a safety net for them. So I would still expect them to not fall below Vandy, even though they do have one more loss than the Commodores.
And keeping for purposes of context, last week Vandy was 14. Heather's got Texas at 15 because you kind of see that proximity there that she's talking about. Playoff rankings tonight right around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. More on that in just a little bit. It's time for our Capital One rewarding performance, and I don't know who deserves this more than Texas A&M completing the largest comeback in school history. They were down 27 points. They were down 30-3 at the half at home, and in basically one quarter wiped it all. And let's hone in on the two lost teams. Georgia Tech averted a near disaster. Boston College played them tight. In fact, Tech had a double-digit fourth quarter deficit before rallying to win in Chestnut Hill. What a win for Oklahoma. A statement win, and of course this begs the question, where will two-loss Alabama end up again? We'll talk about many of the two-loss teams here in a moment. Notre Dame, of course, is among those two-loss teams. This is Jeremiah, 56-yard spin cycle to the house, and this game was basically over at the half. Let's take a look at the top two-loss teams that I'm sure are going to be a part of this discussion, with Alabama, Notre Dame, and Oklahoma, with the latter two winning this weekend. All right, Heather, I want to start with you. There are a possibility of 6 SEC teams finishing with 2 losses, 5 Big Ten teams could finish with 2 losses, and 4 Big 12 teams could finish with 2 losses. For the purpose of this discussion, we're going to exclude Houston because they're the only team in that entire group that really hasn't made it into the rankings in any real certifiable way. So help me understand, with all the 2-loss teams playoff dreaming, what we should be looking for tonight.
We should be looking for Oklahoma and Alabama as a package deal, either above or below Notre Dame. And I projected this week that they would be above Notre Dame, which would push the Irish down to the 10 spot. And that's because when you look at both Oklahoma and Alabama, they have better strength of schedule and strength of record than the Irish do right now. And Oklahoma now has 3 CFP top 25 wins, including back-to-back on the road against Alabama and Tennessee. I'm curious to see if Mizzou is actually ranked in the CFP top 25 again tonight, because then Alabama has wins against Mizzou and Vandy, and oh, by the way, what should be a top 4 win tonight against Georgia. They went on that 4-game winning streak that really impressed people inside that selection committee meeting room. So I would be surprised if the committee split Alabama and Oklahoma up because of the schedule strength.
I love that perspective, Heather, about the package deal, because there are certain teams that are going to be attached at the hip, like Alabama and Oklahoma. But also I think about teams like Notre Dame and Miami, two-loss teams who played one another, who were a little bit separate in the rankings. Notre Dame just played Pitt, and they beat them 37-15. Miami plays Pitt, I believe it's this weekend. Actually, no, it's in 2 weeks. I think that's going to be another thing where if both teams end up at 10-2, I think that's when that tiebreaker comes back into play, because as of now, both teams have similar resumes-ish, but that head-to-head I think will come into play because they would have beat some of the same teams in similar fashions.
Well, it's going to be interesting too, Sam, to see what type of weight they place on that head-to-head, because oftentimes when you play a first game of the season type of scenario, maybe one or both of the teams hasn't found their way yet. That's not how that Notre Dame and Miami game played out. Both of those teams were ready to played a hard-fought battle in week 1. It was a heck of a football game. And so I think that you're going to put the committee in a position to have to tell America Either head-to-head matters or it doesn't. Now, the other thing in this scenario is the Big 12. What happens in the Big 12 if we're sitting there and let's just say BYU and Texas Tech play in the Big 12 and BYU were to win that game? What does the committee do with Texas Tech? Because a year ago, the same thing happened in the ACC and SMU stayed in the field.
Luke, I'm so curious about Miami tonight because I do have them ahead of Texas, but I have them behind USC. USC lost to Notre Dame. Miami beat Notre Dame. Maybe I made a mistake there, but the committee's been looking for consistency out of Canes. They've shown it each of the last 2 weeks. I do think you're right that if they continue to win, that head-to-head will come back into the conversation. So watch tonight how much Miami, if at all, has closed the gap with Notre Dame.
All right, Heather, one for you here. In the first committee rankings, there was an 8-spot differential between Notre Dame and Miami. Last week, it shrunk to 6 from 15 to 9. Any kind of guess on what we might see this week, considering what both of these teams did over the weekend? I thought they both looked super impressive.
With Miami and Notre Dame, my guess is about 4 spots this week. It could be 3 if they put the Canes over USC, but that's going to settle itself out because USC has to play Oregon.
That's right. That's the big game coming up this Saturday. By the way, USC-Oregon this week, meeting as both ranked opponents for the first time in a decade. That kind of shows you where USC has been over the last 10 years. Again, College Basketball Champions Classic tonight at Madison Square Garden, 6:30 tip. As soon as the first game is over, the playoff selection reveal. Number 3 is up right around 8:30 p.m. Eastern.